Here's what could happen, right? This is what potentially worries me. The price of Bitcoin now will actually go down because people are worried that MicroStrategy might have to sell their Bitcoin. Now, people start worrying that MicroStrategy is going to pose a systemic risk to the entire system, which is then going to create more of a vicious cycle on the downside. They may say, you know what, I have Bitcoin, but I want to support other types of things. And maybe I won't call it diversify, but they want to have a little fun, right? They might want to say, I'm going to speculate a little bit with 10% of my Bitcoin, or maybe even 30% of my Bitcoin. I'm more bullish on the ETFs than I am on anything else. I think that's going to be, for sure, is going to be the biggest driver going forward, is BlackRock. I could potentially see a danger on the way down.
Today we have Fred Krueger giving us an update on Bitcoin, the crypto market, and what we can expect in the second quarter of 2025. He recently shared his take on the current economic uncertainty. With tariffs and recession fears creating market volatility, Krueger suggests that a major market rally is on the horizon, and that's where Bitcoin comes in. Bitcoin has been trading more like a risk asset lately, meaning if the market recovers, Bitcoin is expected to surge alongside it. But the uncertainty is key here. If the market remains stuck in limbo, Bitcoin could face short-term pressure. Bitcoin's price currently sits just over $85,000, up almost 7% just this week. Krueger points out that markets have historically bottomed before major events resolve, so we could see a sharp recovery in the next week. The bottom line, Bitcoin's next big move depends on how this plays out. Let's get right into the latest interview with Fred Krueger, as he gives his market prediction for the days and weeks ahead. Drop your comments down below and subscribe if you enjoy the content we do here.
But if the price drops, you have to put more Bitcoin on, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have to repay the loan. You know, those are your choices. I'm just saying, all of a sudden you can get into a world of pain, right?
Yeah.
With these, you know. Now, again, when does that happen? That happens in a bear market. Right? In a bear market, do you really like having $5 billion of debt in a bear market? No, that's usually what kind of destroys you. When we do have the next bear market, in that bear market, what are people going to sell first? MSTR or the Bitcoin that they have in cold storage? They're going to sell MSTR, right? So if they're sitting on MSTR and MSTR is trading in a multiple of 3 or 4 or even 2, they're going to be like, well, I'm going to get rid of this first, right? It's run by Saylor. He might get some liquidated. He might have some margin calls, whatever. You know, if I got my Bitcoin in cold storage, well, that I know. 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. Great. I can just, like, if we get into a complete bear market, right, there's not going to be any new convertible bond offerings. There won't. Those things will be on ice, okay? Do you think they're going to be selling more stock? No, they will not. They will not be selling stock at 1 times multiple. Here's the problem there, okay? They could sell bonds. Yes, they could sell bonds similar to the bonds that they sold their first batch of bonds, right? If you remember, those bonds were at a 9% yield or so, 6% yield. Those were like actual Bitcoin-backed bonds. They actually had to segment out, say this Bitcoin is going to be used as collateral for those bonds, right? Very, very tricky. I mean, which is one of the reasons they quickly paid off those bonds, right? They did not want to have that stuff sitting on their balance sheet. Would they do that? Yes, they could do that, right? They could definitely say, listen, we got all this Bitcoin. We're not going to sell this Bitcoin, right? But we're going to take, I don't know, let's take 100,000 Bitcoin that they have, right? And then we're going to pledge that Bitcoin and we're going to borrow some money against that Bitcoin. What would the interest rate there be? Would it be 1%? Absolutely not. Okay. That Bitcoin is going to, that loan is going to be a 6% loan. Okay. It will, I mean, in today's environment, it'd be a 9% loan, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm just saying, and it would be collateralized by the Bitcoin. So are they going to issue a convertible bond? Nope. They're not going to do it. If their stock is trading and we're in the depths of a bear market. They're not issuing convertible bonds. They're issuing bonds against Bitcoin high coupon. They're going to tie up Bitcoin, and everybody's going to start worrying about those bonds, triggering some redemption clause, right? What they can say is that they need to have a certain amount of collateral, otherwise they need to sell, right? They sort of say, this loan is backed by these Bitcoin. This is what potentially worries me, is we add so much convertible debt to this thing. Let's suppose we get to $30 billion of convertible debt, okay? Let's say. And now all of a sudden we hit a really bad bear market. Now people start worrying that MicroStrategy is going to pose a systemic risk to the entire system. The price of Bitcoin now will actually go down because people are worried that MicroStrategy might have to sell their Bitcoin, which is then going to create more of a vicious cycle on the downside.
Krueger has been bullish in 2025 and believes that people in the crypto world don't understand that there's $20 trillion of actual movable money. He says the relentless math of this asset coming in is going to be mind-boggling. And once you give 100 million Americans with brokerage accounts access to buy Bitcoin, that's really when the game starts. He stands firm that Bitcoin is going to be the primary beneficiary of the next price explosion, which ETFs will play a major part in.
Does that mean it's a systemic danger long-term for Bitcoin? No, but it just could mean we get into a really bad bear market for Bitcoin. Yeah. And one of the casualties of that bear market might be MSTR, right? It might be, right? So there's definitely some scenario where MSTR goes bust. Okay, in my opinion, that's not zero, right? The way. So I don't think it's going to be, again, none of this stuff's catastrophic for Bitcoin. And, 20 years from now, ultimately it's all good for Bitcoin. But I'm just saying, I just think if you are looking at this thing from a personal point of view, I really think there's two ways you can look at this. First of all is you're one of the many people in the world who can't buy Bitcoin. Okay. And I put a tweet out today because I just was like, okay, if you can't buy Bitcoin, but you can buy MSTR, raise your hand. And I had people like, well, I live in Norway. I can't buy Bitcoin. I live in the UK. I can't buy Bitcoin. I live in Saudi Arabia. I can't buy Bitcoin. I live in Sweden. I can't buy Bitcoin. I'm a client of Vanguard. I can't buy Bitcoin. So there's all these people out there who just can't buy the ETF, right? And many people in Europe, they just can't even buy physical Bitcoin. It's just like too hard, right? So there's a whole class of people for which, if they want exposure to this general asset class, MSTR is one of very few ways that they can easily participate, right? If you're in the UK and your main source of money is in your pension fund or something, and the only way to have access to this is to buy MSTR, right? That's your only choice, right? You're in a different category than Rajat sitting in Toronto, and you can buy actual Bitcoin if you want. So I think that there are sort of two kinds of people. One is people just can't buy anything else and have to buy MSTR. They're sort of trapped into liking it or not. Now, whether it's an asset that delivers more Bitcoin every year, it has a Bitcoin yield, I get all that, right? Yeah. But that's one class of people. The other class of people is people who have Bitcoin and they may say, you know what, I have Bitcoin, but I want to support other types of things. Maybe I won't call it diversify, but they want to have a little fun, right? Mm-hmm. They might want to say, I'm going to speculate a little bit with 10% of my Bitcoin, or maybe even 30% of my Bitcoin, right? I was one of those guys, right? Yeah. I bought calls on MSTR. I did really well with my calls on MSTR, okay? But do I see a massive need to buy MSTR at 3 times the amount of Bitcoin, even if they're producing a Bitcoin yield? No, I don't. If you take the average of Bitcoin price and you take the price in log of Bitcoin price, and you average it over the last 4 years since the Genesis block, in sort of log time since the Genesis block, okay? And you will see that that's an absolute straight line. And there was just like no variation in that line, zero. It's just
interesting.
And so you're like, I show people this straight line. In fact, I can probably find it for you while we're doing this. But if you look at this straight line, you're like, okay, where do you think this straight line is going to go in 4 years? Now, in 4 years, right, the end point of that is exactly, it doesn't use any past data, right? It's all data that's coming from the next 4 years, right? But realistically, you are not going to say, well, I think it's going to go 5x or 2x up below. You're going to be like, no, it's probably going to continue along that exact line, right? So, so my point is that it's very, very strong statistical behavior. And it's just, if you look at it the right way, using math, using stats, you will see this is what Bitcoin does. And people are like, well, the trend's going to break. The trend's going to, no, the trend, if anything, is getting stronger. Right?
Krueger shares his bold predictions for Bitcoin in the months ahead. Now that he's laser focused on Bitcoin, Krueger not only lays out the revolutionary Bitcoin power law model, but also explains why he believes a $1 million Bitcoin isn't just possible, it's inevitable. He says the current volatility is a natural phase of Bitcoin's maturation and could present a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity. Krueger highlights how Bitcoin's decentralized nature and finite supply make it uniquely positioned to withstand economic turbulence, asserting that it will eventually outcompete traditional fiat currencies. His conviction? Bitcoin isn't just a speculative asset, it's the future of money, and those who invest now could be part of a financial revolution. What do you think about Fred Krueger's prediction for Bitcoin and where he sees the world of crypto in the months ahead? Comment down below. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more content just like this. We'll see you in the next video.